so she came back and she was talking about the lady who was speaking, and we got into a discussion about women ministries, women working in church speaking and things like that. And my son-in-law has a master's in divinity, and so I shouldn't have been talking to him about it. But he, so we were talking about, and I think I quoted something from like 1 Timothy 3, and he had a different point of view. So it was a very amicable discussion, but ever since then I've kind of wrestled with. It's like I couldn't let go, and there was something like I was completely confident I was right in it, but then there was something like a nagging doubt in me about my perspective, and I'm so in that process I've kind of tried to. There's certain scriptures in Paul that I've struggled with trying to figure out, and so one of the things that I was listening to Tim Mackey from the Bible Project. I don't know if anybody's heard of Tim Mackey. So anyway, he was talking about some of the scriptures in Paul, and he mentioned this book and said this was a really good book. So I got the book to read it, and back at the lakeside is where I read it. There are footnotes in here. They're almost the whole page. So you know what kind of book you're reading when you've got footnotes that big. And so it was, I know it'd take me a while to get, when was it written? It was written 2016. And Cynthia Westfall is a professor at McMaster Divinity School in Canada. And she's probably in her 60s, I think. And she comes from a very traditional background. But she said, when you tell me that women have to submit, she says, I have no problem with that because I've read the Bible and I know everybody has to submit. So I understand there is submission for everybody. As she was going through getting a master's and that sort of thing, she said the thing that I struggled with, she said she has a very high view of Scripture, and she said, but the thing I struggled with is every interpretation I had of certain passages of Paul were incoherent.
What?
Incoherent. So 1 Corinthians 12 talking about giftings, and early on 1 Corinthians talking about women prophesying or preaching, and then getting into 14 saying being silent. So she said, because, so the view that I had was, well, you just read plain reading of Paul, and you don't, that's how you interpret it. You don't have to go into culture and stuff like that. The problem is, everybody takes some kind of an arbitrary line and draws it where they want, because nobody can figure out exactly what to do. Because, for instance, she said that you take women should be silent. So she said maybe some of the brethren churches do that, but she said otherwise, if you have liturgy, does a woman say the liturgy, or so do they sing a special song? And so she said everybody takes it somewhere and draws an arbitrary line and says, well, I think it's this. So anyway, her goal was to be able to try to interpret in a coherent way, taking Paul seriously and trying to understand what he was after. So, let me look at my notes here so I don't get. She said on page 3, she says, this study suggests, she's talking about the book basically, that traditional readings confuse Paul's theology with his missional adaptation to the cultural gender practices. So she's talking about the cultural gender practices in the Greco-Roman world, that he's taking in a missional adaptation. He was adapting to the culture. Those strategies allowed the church to reach the Greco-Roman culture and to survive within that culture and even to thrive. And then she says in chapter 2,